Hi everyone and welcome back to Cloudberry Flowers. It's great to see you. I'm sorry I haven't managed to get many videos out over the summer. I've been getting used to going back and working full-time in the NHS and also just juggling family life as well, and I've had lots of good intentions to get videos out but it hasn't quite happened. But I am really wanting to get a few out before the end of the season and show you what has been happening, because I have still been growing my flowers and supplying them to florists over the summer months. One of the questions that I have been getting a lot about is how do you condition your flowers? So we grow these lovely flowers here, you can see some sunflowers behind me just now, and how do we condition them so that we can get the best vase life from them once we have cut them? We want them to look beautiful in a vase or be fantastic and long lasting for our florists to pass on to their customers as well. So that's what we're going to have a look at today. So when I have cut all my flowers for my florist every week, my buckets need to be washed again, and they might not look like they're that dirty, but it is still worth giving them a good clean out with warm soapy water and making sure you've rinsed well so that you've got all those soapy bubbles out of the buckets. You really want to be maximising how clean the things are that you're using for cutting. And that's the same with your snips as well. Just give them a scrub down as well. Make sure that they're nice and clean so that you're not transferring any bacteria from buckets and snips to your new flowers that you're wanting to go and condition. So that's my job just now. I'm going to go and clean some buckets that I have used in the last week. Sometimes it's easier just to do a whole batch, set aside an hour, half an hour, and think that is what I'm going to do just now. I'm going to get all the buckets clean, or you might want to just do one or two at a time as you go. And just make sure as well, if you're ready to arrange into something, that you've cleaned out that vase that you have at home as well with warm soapy water. Make sure it's super clean too. So another question I've got asked is, where do I get my buckets from that I use for conditioning my flowers? Well, this is one of my buckets here, and this is probably my best bucket. It needs to go and get cleaned just now, but this has been a really sturdy one. I bought it from Country Baskets and I bought a few of them at the time. They were a little bit more on the expensive side though. A lot of people use Dutch buckets, and also I've got a lot of my buckets from the supermarkets too, because quite often they just throw them out. So it's worth having an ask just to say, have they got any flower buckets that they're going to be getting rid of? Sometimes you can buy them really cheaply, sometimes they'll give them away. So that's quite a handy way of recycling something that would otherwise maybe be getting thrown out. And having different sizes of buckets is helpful too. So I've got some that are taller, and I'll take taller stems, and then I've got some shorter ones which are great for things like sweet peas or anemones or things that are slightly shorter. So I'm just filling buckets up with some fairy liquid and some warm water, and just giving them a good scrub right up the sides as well, and around the outsides as well, I usually do, before rinsing them off. And then I just give my snips a scrub as well with some warm soapy water and make sure that they're thoroughly dried off afterwards. So I've cleaned my buckets with warm soapy water, rinsed them out well, and I just leave them outside to dry off before I want to use them or stack them up for another day. So once my buckets are dry, then I fill them up with a few inches of water, and it's just cool water, it's not ice cold, it's not hot. And I just fill it up a couple of inches because it gets awful heavy to carry your buckets if they're very full down to the flower patch. I top them up once I bring them back up after cutting. Main thing is that I just want to get some water into the buckets and the stems straight into them from the flower patch, so they're never out of water. So we've got those buckets nice and clean and we're ready to go and cut our flowers. But what is the best time of day to do that? Well, there's 2 times a day that I generally cut my flowers, and I am really lucky here in Scotland in that we don't often have really hot days, but there can be summers where it is much warmer, and you may well be in a place where you get an awful lot of intense heat in the middle of the day. So the best times to cut flowers are early in the morning, so before that sun has really come up strongly and you are getting the heat from it. You want to do it first thing in the day because those flower stems are full of water, and that is just an excellent time to cut them when they're least stressed. So quite often if I was cutting for a wedding or cutting for a florist, then I will get up 6, 7 in the morning and I will cut my flowers then before that sun has properly come out. The other time of day that's really good for cutting flowers is the evening, because the intense heat of the sun is starting to go then, and they have been able to produce lots of sugar in the day, and the plant is generally not as stressed then either. So quite often I will cut flowers when I've come home from work, and that'll be late evening while you've still got some light. So you might have to wait a little bit of time for that intense heat to die down where you are, and you could be cutting quite late at night, so it could be 10 o'clock at night in the height of summer when you've got a lot of daylight hours. Just now, if you had a warmer day, it's getting darker earlier, so I might be cutting at about 8, half 8, just before we lose the light levels. So that's the times of day that I would recommend. Early in the morning is the absolute ideal, and if not, in the evenings. And if you have to cut flowers in the strong sunlight in the day, then what I would recommend then is taking your buckets of water with you and cutting straight into them and getting them out into a cool, dark, shady place as quickly as you can. So doing it quickly, never having them out of water, cutting directly into it. And I generally do that anyway. I always carry my buckets of water with me, but it would be especially important if you were having to cut in the heat. So we've got some Astrantia, that's a second flush in the garden today, and this is a good one to cut. It's very easy to condition, it doesn't need anything in particular. You don't need to condition it in a certain temperature of water, you don't need to be searing its stems, just need to put it into some clean water for a few hours, and that's fine for conditioning. And this is great, this Astrantia, because it's a second flush. So it flowered first for me in June, and then if you cut your flowering stems back, it'll give you a second flush now in late August, September time. So definitely recommend this as a cut flower to grow. When cutting on Astrantia stems, I'm cutting down towards the base of the plant. It encourages new growth. So I've got a super long Astrantia stem there, and we don't really need to strip much back from an Astrantia stem because they don't tend to have too many leaves on them. But if there is any leaves below the waterline, make sure to strip them off, and we'll just put that into our bucket of water. Now at the moment, to take it up to the flower patch, I've only just put a couple of inches in the bottom so the flowers can go straight into water, but I will top up the water level when I get back. It's just because it can get very heavy to carry buckets of full water around, so you just want to have enough in there that they're hydrated and straight into water, but not too heavy to carry. So I've just taken the organza bag off this dahlia that's been protecting the petals, and we're just going to go down on the stem and find a good place to cut. And you really want to get as far down into the base of the plant as you can to promote more blooms to come, and that surprised me. I always was quite tentative about cutting far too far into the plant, thinking that that would really scupper my chances of good flowers and delay flowering, but actually it's been the best thing that I have done. It's really given me maximum production of dahlias every year and really long, nice stems to use in arranging. So you can see here that there are some side shoots coming out here, so we can snip just here on the plant, and that'll promote new growth and new blooms in a few weeks' time. So we have our beautiful dahlia cut here, and it's got long sturdy stems, that's great. But for conditioning, as you can see, we've got some lower leaf growth going on here on the stem, and that's going to be below the water line, so we need to remove that before putting it in our bucket. So you just pull those side shoots off like that, and that just leaves a much longer, cleaner bit of stem with no side shoots coming off it that would get into the water and start making bacteria grow and decomposing under the waterline. So today we have just cut a few different flowers and foliage in here just so that I can show you how I condition different types. Normally I would be cutting much larger volumes of the same kind of flower, and I would be categorizing them into buckets just to make things easier for stem counts when I wanted to arrange or send off to florists. But this is just going to give us a good idea just now about how to condition different things. So let's have a look at some of the individual flowers. So we've got this nice white phlox here, but as you can see it has leaves all the way down the stem, and some of those are going to be below the water line, so we're just going to strip those. So once you've stripped all those flowers off, then you have some nice leaves at the top still, but you've got a long stretch of stem there that can go into our bucket of water. And let's have a look at some other ones. So we've got some Achillea here. Again, it's got some growth on the bottom there that we want to take off. Others like this Docus, they haven't got much down there, so they can just go straight into their water. So how long am I leaving my flowers to condition in their buckets? Well, it does depend on what is manageable for you and when you're having to arrange them. So in an ideal world, I will cut my flowers the evening before a florist needs them or before I'm arranging for a wedding, and then they will have that whole overnight period where they can then recover. If I needed a few extra ones and I was cutting in the morning, early morning for a florist, ideally they would have several hours of conditioning before that florist picked them up. So an absolute minimum, I would say 2 to 3 hours of conditioning, but ideally really overnight is perfect. That just gives them that time to take up water and to recover to the fullest extent that they can, and that of course will lead to longer vase life and better quality flowers for longer. Here's some ladies' mantle. Again, this is going to need stripped so it's not under the water line, and a nice new cut made in it once that's been done. So I'll cut at an angle like that and then into water. So remember, if you think something's going to be an irritant to your hand, do wear gloves, especially with some stems. So again, this one here has got quite a lot of growth towards the bottom of the stem, so we need to take that off. Just having a bucket nearby which you can put all of that excess growth into is helpful. You can pop that into our water. What else have we got? So we've got a lovely astrantia here, not too bad generally on the stems, but again there's something on the bottom, so I'm just going to take that off. It's easy to remove, and then that's a nice stem that can go into our bucket. Got a beautiful nigella here. Quite often they have things that are on the bottoms of the stems from a foliage point of view, so again just take your hands and strip it down like that. It's really easy to do. And then that can go into the water as well. Another beautiful nigella. Again, foliage down the bottom of the stem. Just take your hand and strip that off there like that. And straight into water. Got our beautiful astilbe. Let's check out the bottom of the stem. Not too bad there at all. I don't think that's going to be below the water line. You could if you thought you wanted to take off that excess branch, especially if it was going to get in the way for flower arranging, so it might do that just now. I can just take that one off, and just to neaten it up I'm just going to do an angled cut there and then pop that into the water. Got some lovely ageratum here. But again, it's got a lot of foliage right at the bottom. You couldn't put that straight into water. That would just decay and cause bacteria to get into your water, which would decrease the length of all the flowers that we're conditioning in there. So we'll take that off. So you might have heard of hammering or crushing your stems. That's something that people used to do, thinking that that would be a good way for the stems to take up water and condition them. But in actual fact, this is something that I wouldn't recommend doing, because if you crush or hammer the stems, you're introducing bacteria into the water. You've really damaged those stems. They're not able to take up water in the same way, and the chances are that the stem's going to break down more easily in that water and cause that bacteria to build up. So that's not something that I would recommend. So what happens if you've got something shorter like a sweet pea? They're not going to be able to go in a bucket like this. They're going to just get a bit crushed if they're in there with these much bigger stems. And these are quite short stems at this time of year because we're getting to the end of the season and the sweet pea stems are getting shorter, but they're great for jam jars. So what I'm going to do with these is, I showed you earlier in the video that I had some smaller buckets, so I could use those, or I could just use a jam jar as well. So you can see over here I've got a jam jar. It's nice and clean, it's freshly filled up with some cold water, and I can just simply use that for conditioning in and put them in the cool dark garage as well. So just like the other flowers, I'll just give them a fresh snip so they get placed into the jar of water, and we'll get some more cut and they can condition together. So another question that I have been asked when it comes to conditioning flowers is, what do you do if you've got pollen beetles on your flowers? These are little black insects that you might have seen, and they're fairly harmless, but you obviously don't want them on your flowers if you're going to have wedding flowers or giving them to a florist or customers. So something that you can do is you can cut your flowers into your buckets to go and condition them, and I put them in my garage is where I put them. It's an old stone garage, it's nice and cool, and what I do is I put them on the shelf in the garage in the dark, but I leave the garage door open a little bit so there's some light there, and the pollen beetles tend to go and fly towards the light and leave those flowers. So that's something you can do if you have them in the darkness and have a source of light further away. They will come off the plants and they will fly towards that light. So these lovely flowers that we have cut from the garden today, when it's been nice and cool temperatures early in the morning, are all mixed in together in this bucket. And you might be thinking, can I do that? Can I put all these mixed flowers in together? And the ones that we have chosen today, they don't have any sap that comes out of their stems, so these are fine to mix. However, if it was springtime and I was cutting narcissi and tulips and I wanted to condition them, I wouldn't put them in together. The narcissi have a sap in them that will keep coming out once they are cut, and it'll take a while to seal up. So you want to condition them separately. You wouldn't put them in with your tulips, because then that would mean that their life was severely diminished. So absolutely fine to arrange them together once they've had a chance to leak that sap, and then the stem to seal off again, as long as you don't recut the stem. So you kind of need to know what your lengths are as well when you're cutting them to condition at that time. But I certainly wouldn't be mixing them together to condition them. So this is me here with a bucket of narcissi for a florist, and they have all been getting conditioned separately from the tulips that I was providing for the florist that day. And because I had lots of narcissi, I could fill a whole bucket for the florist. Now, sometimes I do have a few narcissi that I want to give a florist alongside lots of tulips. So what I would do there is I would go and condition the narcissi separately first and let them leak all that sap out. And once they had sealed, only then would I put them in the florist buckets with the rest of the tulips here. So I would never just put those narcissi in the first place to condition with the tulips. They would have to be done separately first. And then once you have done that, you've done that separate conditioning, you can mix them into a nice bouquet like this to give to your customers. And as long as they don't recut those stems when they put them in their vases at home, then you should be able to get some good vase life from your tulips and your narcissi. So another really good question I have been asked is, what stage do you cut your flowers at for optimum conditioning and vase life? And it's different for all your different flowers. So it's also going to depend what you're cutting for. If you're wanting a florist to get them for general sale throughout the week, you're wanting them to be at a fairly early stage, but they will be able to come out later on. So for instance, if you had something like the snapdragons that I've been growing this year, or your larkspur, you would have just about a third of the flowers out at the base of the stem, but still more to come out further up. You wouldn't want them all out, because you're not going to get a long vase life from those flowers. However, if you were cutting for a wedding and it was the night before you were arranging, then you would want them more fully out so that you get the full effect of that flower. So you have to just think, what am I using these flowers for? Am I wanting the longest vase life possible, or am I wanting them to look fully out and really beautiful in 24 hours time? So here's an example here where we've got snapdragon with a few of the flower florets out at the bottom, but you've still got quite a few buds that are ready to open in the future at the top, so that's a good time to cut. There are a few flowers where you have to cut them fully out. So things like dahlias and zinnias, they won't open anymore after you have cut them, so you want them to be fully out. And things like zinnias, if they're not mature enough, you can test them with that wobbly stem trick to see if they have got nice strong stems. They'll wilt if you cut them too early, so you do have to make sure that they're fully out as much as you can. And things like Ami Magus as well, with those lovely delicate white frothy flowers, if you cut them too early when they're immature and the flowers aren't out, then they are prone to wilting too. So you have to make sure that they're out, but not too far gone that they're starting to drop their flowers and they've been pollinated. So it is a bit of a balancing act. Things like cosmos, you can cut them and crack bud, and that's sometimes quite helpful. You can see that there's some cosmos behind me here. You can probably just see these ones here, and they're fully open at the moment. There's some more here that are fully open, and that's too late to be cutting them unless you're using them for a wedding in 24 hours time, but you do want to be cutting them cracked bud really for coming out later in the week for florists or in bouquets. So maybe 1 or 2 open in a bouquet, but more that will come out later on. So this lovely apricot cosmos is just starting to think about coming out. Sometimes you can get quite a lot of this ferny foliage on the bottoms of the stems, so just have a look at your stems and make sure that any that's left on it are above the water line. It is really nice to use it in arranging the foliage too, so don't take all of it off, but just have a look down. This one's actually not too bad, but I might just take those bottom sections off there just to be sure that they're nowhere near the water. Status is another flower that I've got out at the moment, and again it has to be quite fully out before you cut it. You want to be seeing those little white flowers coming out on the more colourful bracts, and that's a sign that they're ready to cut as well. Status, love this at this time of year, really nice. Got these lovely flowers on the top. You can see it's at the right stage for cutting because it's got these little white flowers coming out, but you can see there's a lot of foliage going on down that stem, so that all needs to be stripped away before it can be conditioned. So they'll come off fairly easily, just like that. Make sure that there's not too much left on the stem there. And then it can get a cut again. And into water. So no matter what we do, some flowers when we're conditioning them will just wilt. You'll have put them in their buckets, you'll have left them to hydrate overnight, and you'll be thinking that they should be looking really good for starting to arrange, but you go back to them and they are still wilting. What can you do? Well, there are some tips that you can use for flowers like that, and hellebores for me are one of those ones that maybe do need a bit of help. So here we've got some hellebores that are flowering. Usually I would be cutting my hellebores in the springtime, but we've got a few extra ones that have been flowering at this time of year in early September. And hellebores are very prone to wilting. You have to cut them as mature as possible, and that will definitely help when harvesting them and conditioning them. But another trick that you can do is searing the bottom ends of the stems in boiling water. And other things are like cerinthe as well can benefit from this, roses. So I'll show you what I mean by that just now. So here is just to show you, this is a jam jar that I have got, and I have boiled the kettle and it's just come off the boil, and I have just put about 1 inch of boiling water in the bottom. And what we do is we get our hellebore stem, or it might be a rose stem or cerinthe or anything that is prone to wilting, and we would just put that newly cut stem end into our inch of boiling water, and we leave it there for about 30 seconds, no longer than that. And if you've got some flower heads out, just keep them out of the steam. You don't want them to be ruined from the steam coming from the boiling water. And after your 30 seconds is up, you'll be able to remove it and then put it straight back into your cooler water to condition. So that's our 30 seconds up now. And then it just goes straight back into our bucket of water. Now hellebores need a lot of water when they're conditioning, and this is me just taking them off the flower patch, so I've not got so much in my bucket, but I am going to top that right up so it's up the neck of the stems here, to give them a good soak. So woody stems are a little bit different as well. We want to have maximum uptake for our woody stems, and they find it a bit more difficult than our annuals for taking up water. So what we want to do with them is we want to give them a vertical slit at the bottom. So you've cut your stem away from the plant, and then we need to add a vertical slit of just 1 inch or 2 at the bottom, and that will maximize their water uptake and mean that they will then not wilt for you as well. So let's go and have a look at doing that just now too. So next up here to show you some foliage. So I have cut some Physocarpus gold dart, which is a fantastic foliage to use, but again it could be prone to wilting, especially if it was earlier on in the season in the springtime when the new growth is just coming out. So you want to give that a good chance to take up some water. Again, you might want to do the boiling method that we just showed you with the hellebores, where you dip the stem ends into water. That can help, but also doing a vertical cut on the bottom of the stem is really helpful too. I've just got a little bit of excess foliage there that I want to remove before conditioning, so I'm going to take that off just now. So you just want to take away any excess that you think will be below the water line. So I'm just going to take that off. And that just leaves us with a much longer stem there. So our stem takes up as much water as possible, we're going to do an angled cut at the bottom. And the reason we do that is if you just did a straight across cut and it sits on the bottom of the bucket, it's not going to be able to take up water so easily. It's going to be right on that base of that bucket. But if you do an angled cut, then it'll just mean that water can easily get in from underneath. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put a vertical slit up about 1 inch on the bottom of the plant like that. And that just allows it to take up water. So we're doing a vertical slit rather than hammering and bashing the stem ends, and that means that it'll stay a nice healthy stem and not introduce any bacteria into the water. So that's going straight into our bucket of water just now. So again, this is Spirea, which is lovely foliage to use in arrangements, and I would do exactly the same again. I would put a slit up the bottom of the stem and a slightly an angle cut. So you should be able to see there that vertical cut that has gone up the stem, and we'll just pop it into some water and let that hydrate as well. So here's just an example of a foliage bucket that I was cutting for a florist, and all of these stems in this bucket I would all have treated the same. They would get freshly cut straight into water, then I would remove any lower leaves that were going to be below the water line in the bucket as I condition them. I would then do a vertical slit like we've just looked at for about 1 inch, 1.5 inches up the stem, and then they would go back into a nice deep bucket of cool water to then hydrate overnight. And foliage quite often needs a really good long drink, so overnight is ideal. So some flowers still keep growing once you've cut them. They'll grow towards the light, and it can mean that you get quite wonky stems, and you might want nice straight stems for your floristry. So what can you do there? So these are things like tulips, and you can get things like Hesper still growing, Phacelia still grows, snapdragons. These will all keep shooting up, and sometimes it's helpful to wrap them in brown paper or newspaper after you've cut them. So you could just put a bunch together and wrap them in newspaper and then condition them in your water bucket. That just helps hold those stems nice and straight for you, and they won't keen over towards the light once you come back to look at your buckets the next day. So we've got this lovely snapdragon here, and you can see that I've harvested it when we've got a few of the bottom flowers out, but we've still got more to come on the top there, and that'll give us some optimum vase life there. But if you can see, we turn it around, we've got a lot of foliage going on all the way down the stem there, so we need to remove a good chunk of that. So let's do that just now. Now, snapdragons are ones that can bend towards the light when you are conditioning them. They will continue to grow and bend, so we need to make sure that we are wrapping them in newspaper with a few snapdragons together, and that'll just keep our stems nice and straight for us. So just be sure to get as much off as you can there, and then I'm just going to do a nice new cut there. So for our snapdragons that are going to bend towards the light, we can simply get some newspaper or brown paper, and I've just folded this over like that, and then we can wrap up our snapdragons in this, and that will just keep the stems nice and sturdy whilst they are conditioning. So here's our snapdragons here. I'm just going to wrap them up. And then you can use a little bit of tape to secure them if you need to. And then when they're wrapped nicely like that, they can just go into their bucket of water to condition. And then they'll have nice, sturdy, straight stems. Some flowers, such as tulips, we want to cut when we're just starting to see colour in that bud. That means you'll get maximum vase life for them. So that's quite an early stage that you're wanting to cut your tulips. You can really see tulips will change within hours in the daytime. So if you get a nice, strong, sunny spring day, you can have them looking like they're not ready early in the morning, and then suddenly they're out in full bloom later in the afternoon. So you have to be quite careful at watching your tulips over the springtime and just catching them at that right stage. And it might mean that you are harvesting your tulips several times throughout a day just to catch them, because if you leave it, sometimes they've just gone too far, and that's really unfortunate because tulips are one of the most expensive products to buy in as a flower grower. So it can be a really intense time where you are really harvesting very frequently. So we've got these lovely flowers all cut from the flower patch. We've stripped their bottom leaves off, but now we want to fill our buckets up a little bit more with water because we only had enough in that we could carry when we were down the flower patch. So I'm just going to add some more because we want them to be in a good depth to condition. This water is not ice cold, it's just tepid. And you want to make sure when you're topping up the bucket, if you are, that you're not having any of those leaves below the waterline. So if you think that there's any that are just looking like they're a little bit low, then remove them. But I think we're okay here from what I can see. Now what happens if it's raining when you have to cut your flowers? I can feel it spitting just now, I can feel it just starting. So if I needed to cut some flowers later on today, it could well be wet. If it was wet and I was having to cut them then and I didn't have a choice, then I wouldn't be having them as crowded as this in a bucket. So I got a bucket over here, about 3/4 full of water, and I would be wanting to space my flowers out so that they could dry off without bumping into each other. So I'd be spreading them out like this so that they had a bit more space between each one. Like that, and I just go around my bucket filling them like that, but just giving them that extra space between the flower heads, and that gives them time to dry off. So we have an old stone garage in our garden, and it's the perfect place for conditioning flowers for me because it's dark and it's cool and it doesn't get hot in the summertime. It's nice and dry, and the flowers are nice and protected in there and can condition really well and recover from being out in the garden. So if you've got an old stone shed, or maybe you've got a cool basement, or even some people like to condition their flowers in the bathrooms and things, just wherever you have got in your house that is cool and dark and is going to be a great place for your flowers to recover. So you don't want anywhere that's in direct sunlight, you don't want anywhere that's too hot next to radiators, don't want anywhere too bright, just somewhere that is not too full of light, darker if possible, and not too warm. So here we are, that's them into the old stone garage where they'll sit here for a good couple of hours before arranging, and ideally overnight. So another question that I've got asked is about flower food. What flower food do I use with my flowers? And I personally don't use any. I think it's really important to have clean buckets, clean vases that you are putting your flowers into. You're cutting at the right time of day. You're giving them enough of a length of time to condition well. And then once you've got them arranged, it is making sure that you're going back, you're changing that water every couple of days, recutting your stems at an angle, making sure that you haven't got any of those leaves and debris on the stems below the water line, and making sure that if you've got any faded flowers in arrangement, you then take those ones out so you can enjoy the ones that are still left. And I find if you do all those things, then you'll get really long vase life from your flowers, and I don't feel that I need to add any flower food in with it. Lots of people do try different flower foods, and that's absolutely fine. You can make homemade ones, you can buy in ready-made flower food. It's just whatever works for you. But personally, I feel like if I'm just using fresh, clean water and clean buckets and vases, then that's good enough for my flowers, and they do last a super long time. So another few tips to go alongside the ones that I've just been talking about, such as removing the faded flowers and changing your water every couple of days, recutting your stems at an angle. Also, when you get your vase of flowers home like this, or a bouquet of flowers, make sure that you're putting it in a place that's out of direct sunlight. So don't put it right in a sunny windowsill or in the middle of a table where there's streams of sunlight coming in at it, because it won't last as long. Or if you are wanting it in the middle of your table and you know it's a really sunny spot, put it out for that meal where everybody's around the table, and then put it into an area that's slightly more shady later on. Same with really heated rooms, your flowers will go over quicker, so try to keep them when you can somewhere cooler. Just bring them out into that really warm spot to enjoy them when you've got people around, but then put them somewhere cooler later on, or keep them in a cooler room in the first place. And just watch as well for that fruit bowl, because fruit as it ripens produces a gas called ethylene, and this can cause your flowers to go over quicker. So if you can, make sure that you position your vase or bouquet of flowers away from the fruit bowl. So here you can see I've got some sweet peas. We want to move that right out the way to keep them lasting as long as we can. So thanks very much for watching my video today. I think we've just got away with it without it raining. It has been such a wet summer, very grey summer with very little sunshine, so really quite challenging. So I hope you enjoyed hearing my tips about what to do if you're having to cut those flowers in not great weather conditions with lots of rain. And hopefully I'll be able to get some more videos out. I want to show you what I have been doing over the summer, so that'll be another one coming up, hopefully in the near future as well. But if you've got any questions, please do just pop them in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So here is a last look at some of the buckets of flowers that I have cut this summer and been conditioning using the tips that we've talked about today. And just while we're having a look at these, just wanted to signpost you towards some of my cool flower videos for annual sowing of seeds in August, September time. I know we're into September now, but it's not too late to be sowing those seeds to overwinter for earlier flowers next year. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that, then I will leave a link at the end of this video to find some of my previous ones where I have talked about this. And I've got some seeds going in the greenhouse just now that are just germinating, and I'll be able to overwinter.